This presentation is for informational purposes only and is not offered as legal or professional advice regarding any particular matter. No person should act on the basis of this presentation without seeking appropriate professional advice. The speaker's views expressed in this program may not be reflective of those of anyone else, including their respective firms or any of its lawyers, associates, or clients.
Welcome to Supercharged Supply Chain, a podcast that delves into the complex, complicated, and ever-changing world of getting product from a source to a destination with your hosts, Ron Liebman and Joseph Paris. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Supercharged Supply Chain. I'm Joseph Paris, and my co-host is Ron Liebman. How are you doing today, Ron?
Good morning. How are you doing, Joe?
Good, thanks. Good, thanks. Now, on a previous podcast, we spoke about the VUCA world, supply chain, the VUCA world, where VUCA stood for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And we talked about in a VUCA world, you have to have an organization that is ready to engage in things that are unplanned. But obviously, if you can't be ready, then you should be resilient. I mean, an organization that is resilient can withstand the siege of uncertainties and challenges. So, what do you see in this, ever-changing world about the need for resiliency, its place in the supply chain, in logistics, in distribution?
Resiliency obviously is the big catchword nowadays. And excuse me, it appears most larger companies, at least, are assessing their supply chain to determine if they are going to make changes or not. Just this week, for example, a very large client of mine in the medical field, I was working with them because they've sort of taken a deep dive into whether single sourcing is a good idea or not. And it's interesting what they found out through doing that. Besides finding out that they want to have backups, they also found some places that they assumed were best price were not. And so they're not only reassessing their supply chain now based on efficiency and avoiding kinks, they realize they have to relook at it from a price standpoint and not make any assumptions. So I think it's everyone looking at change. I mean, resiliency really could be called flexibility. And I think that's the key term, because you have to constantly be flexible and constantly be looking at things, not simply put a book on the shelf and say, here's our policy. It's kind of how we got to where we are now.
Yeah. I think of resiliency as having a little bit of body fat to carry us through the winter. I was speaking to a director of a manufacturing site for a world-renowned automotive manufacturer yesterday. And I was speaking about this very thing. In fact, this particular manufacturer is in the UK. So not only are they dealing with the rough and tumble of COVID, but the near immediate exit from the EU. And I was asking him about his supply chain, specifically, and in his inventory carrying levels. And he was making some specific remarks about, he's concerned about not having product, raw material, in order to keep the production line running. So they've actually been building inventory in anticipation of disruption, which of course goes against the Toyota production system and lean. For those people that are familiar with that, you don't want to build or buy anything unless it's sold, is the underlying mantra. But here they are purposefully building inventory in anticipation of disruption. And not only that, the other side of this is that they're actually building inventory in anticipation of perhaps having to shut down because of a COVID outbreak. So they're actually building 3 or 4 weeks worth of finished goods ready to go out the door, just to be prepared for the moment that might come where they have to shut down their production because of their own COVID outbreak. So not only are they worried about the disruptions of Brexit and the suppliers having a COVID outbreak and having to shut down for a couple of weeks, they're doing it themselves. So I think that, the pandemic and the transformation, the challenges in the supply chain that are taking place are going to cause a fundamental rethink on just in time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
sorry.
it's funny. I think lean could be recharacterized as fit, and that's being in good shape versus trying to be the skinniest you could be. If you're the skinniest you could be, you end up getting sick.
Yeah.
And I think after 20 or 30 years of stable, relatively stable world economy, at least within the context of product flow, it just doesn't exist anymore. I mean, right now, I think we all know there's a shortage of ocean containers. And
Right.
so I have clients who are big retailers looking to move things, and they're worried about will they have enough containers to finish out their seasons. And that, this is, the second, third, fourth time we've had this happen. And, that's a whole episode in itself. Why? But, that's why you always have to have now, we talked about in the VUCA program, forward stock,
Right.
redundancy. And sometimes that redundancy comes at a cost. And the cost is, you have to raise your cost per unit a little bit to make sure you don't end up with a large out of stock number.
Right. And I think that, we might want to consider it almost as self-insurance. I mean, we buy,
yes.
we want to, we buy insurance to protect us against, calamity. And I think it's, instead of having to worry about your suppliers and, legal implications of their not being able to fulfill obligations, that remedy would be, in the future, but it doesn't satisfy the real pain that they're feeling right now. And I think, pennies on the dollar to carry a little bit of extra inventory as insurance might be a prudent thing to do.
It involves, though, having to do a rethink across the board, starting in the schools that teach supply chain logistics. They're still using the books with professors who are espousing lean. Now, of course, these people are now out on the street having to explain to their bosses why they couldn't get paper to a store. But you have to start there, and then you have to start with people who learn from there. And so I think, there's been academics writing about this for 20 years also. But I think there has to be a change in attitude, less of a fear about spending the extra penny. I think that consumers are being fed a line that says it'll cost much more. I think we've seen through COVID what it costs not to have product. And I have to say, though, I think we've shown, certainly in the United States, but in Europe, that we do have robust capability to do pretty amazing things with our supply chain. It's a question of, could the Pfizer drug be distributed the way it's being distributed now at minus whatever degrees? We have all this telematics to use. So utilizing all these systems, throwing in a little extra cost, we can still be cost efficient. But as I said before, being too skinny gets you sick. And I think that's where the supply chain gets sick.
Yeah, I was reading just today, in fact, that Moderna's vaccine has been approved. I think that was on Friday, and here it is Saturday. And the U.S. Army and its logistics arm is going to actually be involved in the distribution of it. And because it doesn't require the frigid cold temperatures of the Pfizer vaccine, it's actually being targeted for more rural areas where, airplane flights and things of that nature are not nearly as easy.
Right, but it just shows what we're doing. And I don't think cost is the number one issue in this.
Right.
I think it's getting a supply. Now, again, this is an extreme, just like being too lean is an extreme. So for your average product, there's a middle ground there. But I think this shows that we have the capabilities, most certainly. We just have to come to a conclusion as a society what costs we're willing to take to assure that supply all the time.
Right. And, if everybody is trying to be, resilient, if everybody is being fit as opposed to being lean, then there's no real competitive advantage. But what the competitive advantage will be is in a time of trouble, the company that can provide the material, product, versus the company that cannot provide the product. The company that can will be remembered. That goes to, you know, brand value. That goes to the, you know, that these people didn't let us down, and that you know, converting a customer into a fan is a gigantic benefit.
And also, you know, going to your part of the world, I mean your consulting practice, not Germany, but when you look at it, you know, there is plenty of offsetting technology around or on the board, just to, you know, for companies. You know, when we're doing this, we're talking larger companies. I mean, the supply chain affects everyone, but
All right.
you know, for the most part, we're talking about well-capitalized companies, and there are ways coming on. You know, Joe, you know, I love cobots, things like that, that can help bring costs down while maintaining the safety stocks, maintaining excess
Right.
production, the things you're talking about.
Right, right. So I guess what you're saying and what I'm hearing, and I agree with it 100%, is that any cost of carrying increase by maybe taking more inventory or keeping on more inventory can be offset by optimizations and cost reductions elsewhere in the organization.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. But I think the zealots will want to have it both ways. And I think, as you say, you know, there's a difference between being lean and being fit. I mean, if you're lean, anything that goes wrong has upstream and downstream implications. The remedy is incredibly much more expensive than just having that little bit of self-insurance.
Right. But I also think it involves logisticians teaching finance people,
Right,
you know, because the bean counters count beans.
right, right, right.
And they have costs for out of stock and warehouse holding and things like that. So there has to be sort of a relearning. You know, I was listening to a show last night, and it dealt with the Korean soldiers in Vietnam, which I didn't even know existed. There were 300,000 of them, and there were some supposed atrocities, and they've asked why why the Vietnamese government is making a big deal. Well, it's because nowadays Vietnam wants to be friends with Korea and wants to be friends with Malaysia because they're all worried about China. So you have to wonder, since they're arguing over where the Chinese territory in the South China Sea ends, that's the kind of thing that someone in the supply chain should be thinking of. Oh my God, I'm reading this in the paper. How does this affect me? Not
Right.
simply, well, you know, I get this really good cost out of Southeast Asia, so I won't worry about it because nothing's ever going to happen. And if there's anything we've learned out of COVID, anything could happen.
Yeah, yeah. My father used to tell me, trust everybody, but always cut the cards.
Measure, what is it? Measure twice, cut once, or something.
Yep, yep. That's the carpenter's maxim. Measure
Right.
twice and cut once.
So I really think that's what resilience is. Resilience is simply thinking out front and not taking the norm, what you've been doing for years, as being proper. Now it might be. And I think
Right.
that's, some of the pundits just automatically say you have to change everything. And I'm sure you see in your practice, you can go into people and say, you're fine. And other people who think they're fine who are not. And so I think you have to have an open mind to self-assess.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to do with resiliency, but it does have to do with pragmatism.
Yeah.
I was looking at an article just recently that was highlighting NASA's Lean Six Sigma program. And their boast was they had saved $1.3 million. Okay, to you and I, that might seem like a significant amount of money, and it's not, an insignificant amount of money. But further digging showed me that was $1.3 million over 4 years. And mind you, this is on a budget. NASA's budget was 18 point something billion dollars. So the savings that they're boasting about was basically 0.0017 of the annual budget, 0.09% of the annual budget. I mean, this doesn't get people excited, and, if we think about resiliency, what we have to do, I think, is as an organization, understand that there's book smarts, but the books don't run the business. People run the business. And people are working in the real world. They're not working in vacuums. They're not working in the ivory towers of academia. They turn wrenches, they smell machine oil. And I think it's really, really important to be able to listen to the wisdom of the people on the floor, because they could tell us a lot if we just let them.
Yeah, and let me go back to the VUCA program again. I believe one of the things we talked about is listening to people, building a plan, but make sure that your suppliers and your sub-suppliers and subcontractors all buy into that plan too.
Right.
Go out, when you're talking to people on the floor, it should be their floor also, because you could have the best program in the world, and if your supplier in Mumbai can't follow it, you have no program.
Right. Well, I mean, this is the difference between a supplier and a partner now you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay. A supplier is somebody you cut a PO to, and you pray to God that the material shows up on time, at the right price, and of the proper quality. A partner is somebody that you're working with that understands your plan, understands the changes in your plan or the expected changes in your plan over time, and is able to actually work with you and anticipate and support your business much better. Just as us being a part of the supply chain of our customers should be doing the same.
If you allow people to have input, they buy in. If they buy in, they do what they say. Otherwise, let's be honest, you're not going to send someone to Thailand every week.
You're right.
You could hire an inspection service, an SGS, and they do wonderful jobs, but they're not going to be sitting there in your factory watching your stuff every day, because then you're going to blow your supply chain cost out the window.
Right.
So you got to be reasonable. You got to be logical. You got to bring in your suppliers. Certainly, here's a plug for folks like you and I who have our expertise, who are there to help. It's really, a family of people in the logistics fields and finance fields and manufacturing fields that need to give you input to come to a true resilient supply chain.
Right. Excellent. Well, I hope we've laid some wisdom on our audience today. It was real great catching up and speaking with you on the subject of resiliency in supply chain today, Ron.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Always a pleasure. Yeah. And when do we think our next one's going to be?
Well, I think we have to figure out a subject. So, we'll think about what is the 2021 hot button for supply chain. We know what 2020 was, a VUCA world, readiness, and resiliency. What's going to be important to consider in 2021?
And maybe here's something for you guys. There may be a special guest who joins us.
That sounds wonderful. Yes. That sounds wonderful. All right. Thank you very much, Ron. And we'll see you on the other side.
Goodbye, all. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to another edition of Supercharged Supply Chain with your hosts, Ron Liebman and Joseph Paris.
This presentation is for informational purposes only and is not offered as legal or professional advice regarding any particular matter. No person should act on the basis of this presentation without seeking appropriate professional advice. The speaker's views expressed in this program may not be reflective of those of anyone else, including their respective firms or any of its lawyers, associates, or clients.